Hello students, welcome to financial accounting class. In the previous class we have studied the difference between consignment and sales, and in today's tutorial we'll be studying regarding how to prepare a consignment account. Now all of us know how we prepare profit and loss account. Similarly, we have consignment account also, wherein you have two sides. One is the debit side and the next one is the credit side. Okay. Now here, this is the credit side and next is the previous one was the debit side. Now every account has two sides. One is the debit and next is the credit. Okay. So in debit side of consignment, what do you debit? Cost of goods sold, that is cost of goods sent on consignment. Any expenses which are being made while sending the goods on consignment, then those expenses are being debited. Next, with expenses paid by the consigner, any expenses which are being made by the consigner on the goods, those expenses are also being debited. Next, expenses paid by the consignee by self or on behalf of the consigner, any expenses which are being paid by the consignee. Okay, any expenses which are being made by the consignee by himself, that is he has made expenses by self or on behalf of the consigner, then those expenses will also be debited, because any expenses on consignment are being borne by the consigner and not the consignee. Commission on consignment, this commission is being paid by the consigner to the consignee, so the commission is also being debited. All right, so this is what we consider to the debit side of consignment. Next is to the credit side of consignment account. What do we consider to the credit side of consignment account is sales proceeds on consignment, that is any sales being made, then that is to be credited. Cost of abnormal loss, now this you will be when I'll be teaching regarding losses, when I'll be teaching regarding consignment account, there I'll be telling you what is normal loss, abnormal loss, and so on. Okay, so right now you just remember that any loss is being made, then that is to be credited. Next, value of closing stock, like the way we do in case of profit and loss account, we consider the closing stock to the credit side of profit and loss account. Similarly here, value of closing stock is also to be considered to the credit side of credit side of consignment account, and proportionately any direct expenses being made. Okay, and then the account is to be tallied, and then balance of the consignment account is transferred to profit and loss account. Okay, I hope you have understood how to prepare a consignment account. That is, you have to consider the debit side and the credit side. To the debit side of consignment account, we consider all the expenses, and to the credit side we consider the sales and closing stock and any of the losses being, that is abnormal or abnormal loss being considered to the credit side of the consignment account. Well, the next thing that we are considering is in case of expenses, that is how we prepare the consignment account, that is the debit side and the credit side. Now in this, you if you see here, we have expenses being made with the expenses which are being made by the consigner as well as consignee. Okay, here also you have any losses being made. Okay, so let's see, there are direct expenses being made. Here you have proportionately direct expenses. So what kind of expenses are these? Okay, what expenses do we consider in case of consignment? Now, expenses of consignment are borne by both the consigner as well as the consignee. Any expenses being made on consignment are being considered by the are being borne by the owner itself, by the consigner itself. But it can happen so that the consignee is also making some amount of expenses which he will be getting it refunded by the consigner after, when he's sending the account sales. Okay, so here expenses, what kind of expenses are being considered in consignment? There are two kinds of expenses. One is the recurring expenses, and next is the non recurring expenses. Now let's check in what are the recurring expenses. Recurring expenses are the expenses which incur very often, okay, which are incurred very often at fixed intervals by both the consignee as well as the consignor. So these recurring means which occur very often. Okay, so the expenses which are being incurred very often are called as recurring expenses. These expenses are being borne by both, that is consignee as well as are incurred by both, that is the consignee as well as the consignor. And these expenses usually incur after the goods are reach the consignee. Okay, so these expenses, that is the recurring expenses, incur after the goods reaches the consignee. Okay, next, which kind of goods are they? I mean, which kind of expenses are they? Suppose if it is in case of consignor, so which recurring expenses are being borne by the consignor? Discount on bills, any bad debts, expenses on damage of the goods, commission of the consignee. So these expenses are being borne by the consignor. Next comes to the consignee. Any recurring expenses which have been borne by the consignee are warehouse rent, insurance, brokerage, advertisement expenses. So these are the recurring expenses which have been borne by the consignee. All right. Next is the non-recurring expenses. So which are the non-recurring expenses? Non-recurring expenses are generally, recurring expenses are the one which incur very often. Okay, in a fixed intervals, that is at a very fixed intervals you will have these expenses being incurred. Whereas in case of non-recurring expenses, these expenses are incurred only once. Non-recurring is they occur once in a while. Okay, so generally these expenses are incurred only once on a particular consignment, and these expenses incurred for bringing the goods from the place of consignor to the place of consignee or warehouse, or warehouse of the consignee. That is, these expenses are incurred by the consignee. So, what are the expenses being incurred? Expenses relating to, if it is in terms of consignor, then packing expenses, carriage, loading charges, then freight, insurance, etc. These are some of the expenses which have been incurred by the consignor while getting the goods from his outlet to the consignee's outlet. Okay, these are the expenses which have been incurred by the consignor. You pack the goods only once, right? So you any expenses relating to packing while transporting the goods, any packing being done, then those expenses are being borne by the consignor. Then carriage, loading charges, freight, insurance, these expenses are being borne by the consignor. Now what are the expenses being non-recurring expenses being borne by the consignee? Now loading charges, unloading charges. Loading charges, that is once the goods are being loaded, then those expenses are being borne by the consignor. The consignee has to unload the goods, so unloading charges are being borne by the consignee. Import duty, carriage or to warehouse, carriage expenses from carriage expenses to the warehouse or consignee's outlet, these expenses have been borne by the consignee. Okay, which will be collected, which these expenses, that is non-recurring expenses which have been incurred by the consignee, will be collected by the consignee from the consignor through account sales. Okay, so the account sales will be given by the consignee to the consignor. In that he'll be telling about all these expenses, which he'll be deducting it and giving the remaining amount to the consignor. This we have already seen in the previous class. I'll just show you the here. In this, all these expenses, that is the expenses relating to consignee, commission, okay, advance being paid, these all expenses are being deducted by the consignee and then it is given to the consignor. Okay, then the amount is being given to the consignor. Similarly, the any expenses that is, maybe it is recurring or non-recurring expenses, all these expenses which are being incurred by the consignee are being deducted from the sales amount, and then gross sales amount, and then the amount is being given to the consigner. Okay, that's how the account sales in for account sales is important in case of consignment. Okay, I hope you have understood today's class. In the next class, we'll deal with the next aspect. Thank you.